welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And today we have a really fun guest on the show named Chloë Goodchild. And we came across Chloe's work, maybe a few months back, I think. I can't remember where. Taya actually found it somewhere. It came up. She's like, oh my gosh, we need to interview this lady. This is a perfect part of what we need for this series on living freely. And it's all around finding our authentic voice. And Chloe's the founder of The Naked Voice, a pioneering experiential vocal training program providing a sound awareness toolkit of conscious core practices, music, audiobooks, and spoken meditations that empower you to find and embody your authentic voice, something that I feel like is well needed at this particular time. The Naked Voice Charitable Foundation was established in 2004 to disseminate a deeper awareness of the essential role conscious communication plays in strengthening ethical awareness, social health, and well-being in all realms of human life. Chloe's seminal book, The Naked Voice, Transform Your Life Through the Power of Sound, was published in 2015, and she is here with us today to help us reconnect to our authentic voice. Chloë, welcome to the show.
Hello, it's great to be here. Really looking forward to it.
Me too. You know, I always like to learn about our speakers as far as what brought you along this journey to really be focusing on, what helped you find your authentic voice and then really decided to make that your passion and help others find it as well. What was your journey like?
Goodness me. Well, there are various ways of responding to that question. One is that I had traumatic surgery on my ears when I was a little girl. And that traumatic surgery really was like a wounded healer wake up. Because I was then found myself partially deaf for about 3 years between the ages of 4 and 7. But, as with the wounded healer journey, I think what happened there was that I found myself just falling into the language of silence and the language of the elemental kingdom. Because I could feel the wind. I could feel heat of sun. I found that I could actually communicate with birds, which was absolutely glorious, which is very common for children that age. It's just like, yes, we know each other. So it was very magical in one way, because the silence, or the half silence, I should say, not only introduced me to the magic of silence, but also gave me time away from the social chatter use of the voice. And I think that just embedded, an insight, an intuition within me, which is like, right, social communication is not the only way that I have to communicate with humanity for the rest of my life. There must be something deeper than this. And I was brought up in a religious environment. My dad ended up being an Episcopal bishop, and that created yet more kind of opportunities for deep questioning and interrogation as to, why was this religion at some level dividing heaven from earth and, eros from spirituality. And, when I got into my kind of hormonal teenage years, that became a really serious question. So then, of course, as my hearing came fully returned, I found myself absolutely falling in love with music because I could hear that music offered me a language, Western classical music, of course, this was at that time. And that basically offered me the opportunity, very privileged, if you like, at one level, to go right through the whole Western sacred repertoire of sacred music from our Western point of view. So I was able to absorb, all the great passions of Bach and Mozart and Verdi and Benjamin Britten and, you name it. And then found myself going to university in Cambridge. There again, you've got this kind of very privileged, sacred landscape, but kind of integrated with a lot of emotional, haphazard realms of communication. And so it was still largely, when I was at university there, it was still largely dominated by men. Women were, obviously tolerated. But there again, I had the choice and the chance to sing in the King's College Chapel, and these incredible vertical frequencies of sound that just was just so glorious to absorb. But nevertheless, always in my system, I think I was born, the DNA was one big question mark. It was just like, well, hang on a minute, is this all there is? I mean, this is incredible, but I'm still not embodied. Why am I not embodied? The music keeps sending me up and out of my body. So I went roaring off to Africa and spent 7 months just in the African bush within a fascinating project which was all about exploring and learning about these different tribal languages and whether they would consider how cross-fertilizing and communicating with each other. So that taught me a lot. Also, how to embody the sound. The whole thing is just like you're just steeped in nature there. And so, that, and then, but it wasn't really till I found myself in India that I found a much deeper response to my question about who am I? Who am I? Why am I here? And that question just has pursued me all my life. And it wasn't until I started really absorbing and learning from the Indian vocal philosophy that I was able to hear, everything came into one place, and that one place is an unchanging sound. I have a harmonium down here, which is a keyboard. And so I was just introduced to and that was 2 notes there. Now I've taken that one away. There's actually only this. And this unchanging note, which of course we find right across the whole indigenous world, where the voice and music is still profoundly integrated into everyday life, is where I started finding myself and realizing there just is this one unchanging note that I am. And so in India, you go to India and they say to you, it's not like, well, what have you studied and what do you know? And can you sing this piece of music? All that kind of performative sort of entertainment, egocentric, personality driven communication, which has its own, it has its own purpose, of course. But in India, they just, your teacher will just say to you, what is your note? And then, what is my note? So then it all began from there. And so I found myself moving on one side of the street, working with these incredible classical Indian vocal teachers. And on the other side of the street, being drawn into the whole non-dual lineage of Advaita, non-separateness. And so the alchemy of the two gave birth to the naked voice. And that was it.
Oh, that's beautiful, Chloe. I really resonate with a lot of that. And, one thing that my wife and I have been really drawn to significantly, particularly over the last few years, and we've done lots of stuff with, at least out here in the West, as far as yoga and meditation and all of those sort of things that we've been drawn to for a long time. But there's been a real getting back to the stillness found in nature. We are just absolutely, it's like literally one of my favorite things right now is to just go and sit and do nothing, like be really still in the body. And I have such an appreciation for just the melody that you get of the sounds of the wind, the birds, the trees, all of it. And what we've found is that I really feel like that space, it gets rid of the extra noise that is sort of around us in so many different ways. Not just audible noise, but even from when I think about if we could actually see all the layers of frequency in the greater reality that we just aren't really able to perceive our five senses, we would be bombarded, you know. But I feel like that helps to slow everything down and then connect in my way to more and more continually to this authenticity that I think we are all trying to find, because ultimately that's where I think people actually start to feel more at peace. They start looking so much for things, they start to just feel it shows up.
Right, right. I mean, silence is the language of sound, and no one tends to teach you about that in our Western climate, right? And particularly not now. It's all about noise. But, and I think that is what is so profound about the human voice is that it really, as you're just sharing with us, just you can feel kinesthetically, visually, audibly, you can hear. Sensorially right through, the language of sound is there. It's there, it's everywhere, whatever it is. The lovely Bruce Lipton talking about, the 50 trillion thousand million cells that are in the body, just like nerve cells. You must know about this from the naturopathy point of view, like in the feet, something like God knows how many thousands of nerve cells there are, just touching the ground, enabling us to walk along, and to just, so I've, over the recent, like the last 20 years or so, since touring with the lovely, God bless, Coleman Barks, Rumi poet, I found myself lucky enough to just literally walk about with him. And so it was really singing alongside these ecstatic love poems gave me this a deeper awareness of the purpose and the potency of silence, and how that really is the inspiration for the spoken and the sung voice. And then also to realize that there is no separation between speaking and singing. It's like, who made this separate?
Mm-hmm.
This kind of obsession with the left side of the brain that only talks, it's like, which has dominated our education system and all of that. And then on the right side of the brain, okay, well then you can perform, you can entertain, you can, bring them big money in, and all of that. So what I discovered working with Coleman, when you just have, be helpless, dumbfounded, unable to say yes or no, then a stretcher will come from grace to gather us up, and so as soon as you start reciting words, language in that way, poetically, in other words, the lineage of the bard, the troubadour, you start to hear the music in your own spoken voice again. And inevitably that then connects you, that bridges the intellectual mind with the heart of the soul. And so then you can sink into the, just into the heart of your empathic, intuitive self. And that is what I find so exciting about the way that poetry can actually bridge between, speaking and singing and restore our attention to silence that way, because it stops you in your tracks. That
Mm-hmm.
mystical poetry, it just
Yeah.
stops you in your, it's like falling in love. It's like, whoa, what just happened?
I find it particularly lots of poets, but Rumi is definitely one of the ones that my wife and I really resonate with. And there really is something magical about poetry. It just has a way of quite literally cutting through the noise. It's like it has like a direct access. And as I'm talking about it, I get goosebumps as I'm sort of even thinking and my wife's Persian. So they used to hang out at night and read Rumi. That was a part of what you would do in the evening. Their dad or their uncle would come over, their mom, and they would just read passages, and I'll just sit there and eat fruit and kind of hang out. She has some really fond memories of it. And you hear some of them, and it's got this, I think because beautiful poetry has such a high frequency that it just cuts through the noise and it just lands for people, and you don't have to intellectualize it. That to me is like that's like one of the circuit breakers when you as soon as you take something and try to take it up to the head and try to rationalize, you've lost the deeper meaning of things. So it's almost like a wave that just comes over you, and if you allow it to just wash over you, you get whatever gifts it's going to bring, and you feel it. Like it creates a feeling sense very quickly.
Beautiful, beautiful. Does she recite it in the original language, in the Persian?
They can, yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, they've got an old book that is all in Farsi. So yeah,
amazing.
it's really beautiful. Not that I can understand it. My 8-year-old could probably pick up more of it. She's picked up the language a lot better than I have, but it's just really beautiful. But even English, which I think sometimes can't grasp the complexities of language all the time, or the underlying meaning. But even
Yeah.
when you were talking about just speaking it, we did an interview just recently with another person who wrote a book called Word Magic, and was talking about the power and occult definitions of different words. But the idea is around that, words are powerful, and words hold a certain frequency and a vibration. And when we use them, we are interacting with this greater reality. So to be very mindful of the words that we choose, and then you start to see how it plays out in the world and why certain words are used and the meaning behind them. I mean, we've even gotten now like a Black's Law dictionary to understand what we're actually saying, because you realize so many words we use, the meaning is very different, and we use them unconsciously. And so
Yeah.
it's really, in many ways, trying to be more conscious of what we are saying and what we are putting out into the world, because ultimately I feel like that is what we are creating more of. That's what we are participating in, and just trying to be more responsible in many ways with our own words. From your perspective, I know you've talked about conscious communication. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what is unconscious communication, and why is it so important to start to become more conscious in our communication?
Wow, I love that. I love that question. Because who decides anything? But, and we have been in the West, obviously, we've been brought up in a dualistic reality, not a circular one, as you would find in an indigenous right across the world, actually, not both West and East, North and South. And so I think the identification with duality as oneself as being a certain way, and being determined by the personality field, who one is as a personality. So therefore, the whole kind of understanding of oneself as someone who is desperate to be loved, to be appreciated, to be impressive, to make it in the world. All these kind of requirements of our kind of Western education, to be successful, to achieve, to stand out, to be individual, all of these things. And now that's been really compounded and activated, and, by the technology and all of this. And so I think what's happened is that we've become so identified with the cravings of the egoic mind that we really believe that's who we are. And so we tend to, if no one else kind of gave us an alternative viewpoint, they might have given us another viewpoint, which would be more derived from a religious, institutional context, where we would be required to speak language in a certain way, to have a relationship with the universe in a certain way, according to a set of words and so on. And we might be literally required to abide by that all our lives. In fact, even the decisions we make about how our children grow up and this, that, and the other. So the whole kind of socialization and conditioning process that we tend to get taken through tends to be, human beings tend to be really quite well behaved. I mean, they tend to kind of just sheepishly go along with this, and so it's not until somebody goes, how do you sound, or how does your voice, what do you feel about your voice, rather than how successful were you today in the lecture theatre, more like, well, how do you actually feel about your voice? Do you start to realize, hang on a minute, what do you mean by that? My voice? Most people, if you ask them, how do you feel about your voice? Which it kind of activates a totally different realm of intelligence that is actually very scary for a lot of us, because you're being given the opportunity to have an opinion about yourself that is not bound by any sort of external kind of dictates. Your voice, how do you feel about it? How do I feel about my voice? I mean, I haven't got one. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I haven't, I was told I didn't. I was told to shut up. I was told to be quiet. I was told, that I just don't sing in the choir. I didn't even get into the choir. So it's, so the narrative that goes with that question, then is kind of rather terrifying, because you're then having to revisit the whole narrative of your biological history, and in doing that, you're required to go deeper within. Deeper down. There is a wisdom that is older and deeper than the polarities of the dualistic mind, or the polarities of the conflicted mind. And so what happens is this voice of ours, this sound of ours, is suddenly required to given the opportunity, it's got a new job possibly. And this can come up anywhere. I mean, I was just in our local cafe, right? And I was just putting a very simple, just little pamphlet there, we're running just daily, one-day workshops here, just to restore a kind of a consciousness around being an integrated community again. And with the woman behind me, who was buying the coffee behind me, she said, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, well, that's it's a leaflet we're running actually just at the hall up the road if you want to come. It's just called, Open Your True Voice." And that's what we do. It's sort of exploring, the relationship between sound and silence. And I said, would you like to come? Absolute guillotine comes out. It's like, you must be joking. And then the whole, that kind of narrative comes out. But I think coming back to your question, what is an unconscious voice? I think that is a voice that cannot hear its truth, that cannot and will not express its truth. Now, what does that mean? That probably means that what I just said is my egoic mind. My egoic mind is being kind of thrown around with this because, up to date, my voice is, I've got a good voice in the world, I'm successful, people love my work, and I'm just, but if I actually take that away, who am I? Who am I when I'm just sitting at home in my room here, in my house? Who am I when I'm really just willing to put down the whole journey and be present to who I am when I'm not even this public face here. Who am I? And so I would say that unconscious voice is the one that is deeply protecting itself from the deeper truth of who it may possibly be. You know, I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, Chloe, I think that's beautiful.
Mm.
Lots came up around that.
Mm.
It almost makes me well up. I actually think it's really, really beautiful. You know, I was with my dad over the last while. My dad was going through his final days, and so we all gathered around to be with him. And my dad, for the longest time, was the kind of guy where, you know, you'd come back home from work, you'd go have a beer, and you'd watch TV. Like lots of constant sort of external noise, you know. And even when I'd come to visit, whether watching it or not, it's like the TV would always be on, or there'd be something going on, right? And one thing that I noticed as we'd sit with him when I came, he I feel like even when we did our series on life, death, and beyond, some of these patterns you could see transitions that take place as people move. And I really feel like there's an aspect of preparing people for this transition. And he didn't want the TV on. Didn't even want, I mean, my dad was an avid like sports guy. Like he wanted to watch any game that was on, and even if it was just in the background, but it's like, no, don't want it. And towards the end, he was just in his bed and he wasn't able to move or do anything. Also, like what he was capable of doing with his body didn't allow him. You know, that's also in a way it can be noise, distraction, doing all these things. He literally just had to be there with whatever it was that arose for him. And he didn't even have the energy to actually distract from anything. And I really feel like, you know, and I mean, there was more pieces to this, but it's like what I really got to see was this sort of slow kind of transition of a surrendering. And I feel like an aspect of him getting to know who he really was beyond all of these layers of noise and distraction and ego and all these different things that we think we are. There was a stillness that started to take place and we were there right until his last breath holding his hand. And you could see the stillness completely wash over him as his eyes stayed wide open, not blinking for about 20 minutes. I'm not joking, just staring. You know, I was just holding his hand and just thinking, oh my gosh, whatever you're seeing, Dad, you know, it's beautiful. And so kind of it just reminded me, I was thinking about how the distractions and the things that get away from that authentic voice naturally started to drift apart as his energy didn't allow it anymore. Because I feel like we live in a world where there is so much noise and people are really just like this lady that you spoke with. They're scared to feel what's underneath there. And then we layer it with all the different ways that we can keep busy or distract ourselves from actually going there. And at a certain point, that's all we really want, but we're terrified to actually explore it. What do you find comes up for people? Where is that discomfort and fear? Because I feel like to do this requires a certain level of willingness and courage to be able to stay with this restless energy that's almost one step behind us that we're trying to keep away from, because you've got to be able to stay with it and let that wave come.
That is the one. I mean, it's just beautiful what you're saying. I just love it. And I'm so deeply touched to hear about your father's passing. It was similar for myself. I was able to be with my father. Same thing. He was eyes open, looking out. It's just what a grace, isn't it? And in our work, we talk about this koan, this the alchemy, if you like, actually is a better word, between grace and gradual revelation. So that we're in and on this journey of grace and gradual revelation. And so you experience there with your dad a moment of grace and the silence of, I would imagine, of that moment to be with in that silent music is the most incredible blessing and teaching, of course. Yeah. you're reminding me also of an incredible student who she was in her 60s, and she did a 1 year training with us, which involved coming to 4 5-day residential courses throughout the year, and a 10-day. And by the end of this, she'd never really kind of studied music, which I think was to her benefit, until this point. And so she was really enjoying this whole journey of exploring the relationship between the silence and the spoken and the sung. And so she decided at the end of this year that she was going to go off to India. And she said, I just want to go out there and be there with the source where you got this information from, this understanding from. And so she went out there, and I found a teacher for her that I'd known out there on the banks of the Ganges. And she just started sending me these incredible messages, how it was going with her voice lesson. And I said, record your sessions. This is really important, because you can learn a lot from just, hearing the session back, and just same process as she would have done with us, which is exploring the whole, what we call the octave of consciousness, really exploring, which is so prevalent in yoga, of course, and all the ancient traditions of just simply moving through the 7th and the 8th chakras. And so she was doing this. She'd learned how to do that with us. We do that as a meditative activity, so that you sing it all on one note. And you're sending your awareness through the body as you're sounding that one note, and then you're singing different mantras as you're going rising up, and then bringing that universal energy back down. Or you can take a more relativistic relationship, and we have a whole sequence of energy movements that you can use to move through those different locations of love, we call them, so that you're moving through these different locations of love, the purpose being to integrate all of those into your voice and how you relate with the world. So to some degree, she was actually introducing this to this very, very accomplished Indian classical voice teacher as well. And then there came a time when suddenly there were no recordings. The messages stopped. And after a while, I started thinking, now, why is she not communicating with me anymore? So I just, I connected with my friend, the teacher, and I just said, what's going on? She said to me, Chloe, I am very sorry to have to tell you that your student has passed. And then there was a silence, and I went, what? It was like, surely not. And then there was a long pause, and then she said to me in this beautiful Indian accent, she said, and I want you to know, it was my blessing to be present. She said she knew how to leave. She knew how to leave. This girl, she said, she's been studying with you for 1 year, and she knew exactly how to leave, how to close all the centers, and how to just move into the next room. And she said, in all my 25 years of learning classical sound, she said, I pray I'm blessed with the same passing. So, and she eventually, I was able to receive, and we actually had a funeral for her in a Buddhist beautiful center here in England. And she sent me the recording of the last session, and all she was doing was just singing. It was like da pa da sa da, and then my friend was just singing, copying her sa da. And so what you're doing there is you're bringing your awareness from the crown, which is the top of the octave, and you're bringing that universal energy down into the pineal. That's all you're doing. Very simple. Very simple. And she was doing this. So she was coming down from sa, ni, da. That's all. It was that simple. And she was singing it and she was singing it, and they were back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, till she could just, yes. And then there was a moment where her teacher said to her, this is going to take you a little bit longer than you think, just to be able to sing this exactly as it is given in your body. And that's obviously another whole conversation, which is about the receiving of sound. You know, that we've been taught, oh, you make the sound, you know, you do that, la 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 la, you know, and all of that, and you strengthen all the different muscles and the different power centers and the whole thing, and behold, you can say, well, in obviously you'll be familiar with the work of Hazrat Inayat Khan, and he has this beautiful description of how sound enters the body from the universe. It's utterly beautiful. But in this recording, coming back to this, my friend's passing, you hear the teacher saying, yes, this is going to take you much, much longer than you thought. And then my friend says, but you don't understand. I haven't got time. I really need to know this now. And within a few seconds, she was gone. You know, and that was such a teaching, isn't it? You know, that and if you listen to like the classical Indian, the Dagar brothers, you know, these ancient lineages of Indian sound, of voice, they will spend hours just exploring the whole microtonality of the movement from, you know, the sa to the re to the ga to the ma, what we call the do, re, mi, fa, so, and so on.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating, Chloe, because I also feel like, you know, a lot of these lineages have also started in certain, you know, time space coordinates where the context of the world was a certain way. And I really do feel like right now things are shifting. I mean, beyond, I think, what most of us can comprehend. And I do feel like we have much faster access to things if we choose to. And so if we want to, like, even what you're talking about with, you know, connecting to your authentic voice, I genuinely think even if that might have taken people, you know, much longer to shed the layers to get there, I really do feel like if we want to, it's like right there. And if you're willing and ready to do it, you can connect into things. Just like I find, like, even with healing, you know, I'll see when I see examples of spontaneous healing that takes place, it's things just line up and it can happen. And or it doesn't, you know, it depends. But I really feel like we are at this very interesting time where, you know, whether the veils are a lot closer, something is going on where we are able to connect into different aspects of healing ourselves in a much profound and faster way than I think ever before.
Without question, without question. And, you know, our astrology friends are all confirming this, aren't they? When you actually look at it through that lens, of course, without question. I was working with somebody the other day, and the end of the session, we'd only worked together for a half an hour, 30 minutes. And there was just a pause, and she said, oh, well, that's just saved me 30 years of therapy. So, you know, and what I'm really excited about is that how younger people are coming in, people more in their 20s and 30s, you know, and I would love this work, obviously, to children, just pick it up. One of the practices we do is actually created by 9-year-old children. So you're absolutely right. That understanding is really coming in a very, very powerful way and very fast. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's sort of, you're seeing this in medicine too, but it's like we talked about even prior to starting, but this concept of just frequency, vibration, energetics, magnetics, like this realm, which is much more abstract, but in many ways is what governs more of the concrete. So when we are approaching things from that perspective, we are changing things in a subtle reality way that does have physical ability to change. And I think whatever is going on now, it's whether the density is less, frequency in general is rising, that I think that we can get there a lot faster than maybe what it might have taken someone 20 years. I really feel like it can happen in a very short period of time because the way things are lining up.
Oh, I love what you're saying. Absolutely love what you're saying. And we actually have a chant. May I share it with you? Which is
Mhm.
just very simple, which is just a kind of which is based on the Rumi poem, the translation from Coleman. So it's not the original language, but there's another story to share with you about that, where we found ourselves with a group of Sufi scholars, who were not so sure that the translation was correct. And, Coleman, who is this completely just sort of unmasked, I don't know, Dionysian monk, is just, he said, well, does it matter? Aren't we surely we're all just finding our truth as quickly as we can, So his poem, when we used to record together, he said he would be very, very in the moment. And he would say, right, so I'm just going to read this poem and you do what you like. And if it works, it works, And so he recited the Fields poem, which obviously many of us know so well now. And what I heard was a particular musical mode, and it doesn't matter whether you know this mode or not, but it has a very powerful note in it, which for me really opens up our relationship with love, beyond the bounds of what the possible. And that note is this one. La, the interval rather is la. Now, you will, if I place that in context, that may be more familiar for you. So you've got there Bernstein's Maria, you see. Now, if you forget that, but you just remember there's something very powerful about that interval. It was so powerful. So that is the la 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 la. So it's the sharpened version of what is normally just a lovely la la, which is for us is the heart center. Sa re ga ma. You see? But if you go sa re ga ma ma, you then have a much wider potential of giving, of heart-centered offering, etc. And you don't need to prove that. You don't need a scientist to come along and measure it. It just is a fact. It transmits itself as love,
When you just feel it, like even as you're doing it, I can feel them like
Yes.
moving through the different areas, and not just moving, but then you can feel it like literally.
So
um,
if you, we've done a lot of work with the Irish, and we actually practice these intervals with the energy movements out in the middle of a street. And it's just so beautiful how people will pick it up. It's not a performance or any of that. But so what I did was when I first heard Out Beyond Ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. I said to him, would you mind if I just insert the word singing in there as well? Do you think Rumi would mind if we do that? And he just looked at me in a mischievous face and just said, you do what the hell you like. So this song of the singing field just became, and I used this interval which was abolished by the Christian church for making people too happy. Yeah, too open, I think, you see. So it was not allowed to be used for a period of time. I mean, what is that? What's that? Anyway, we'll come back to the singing field because this also connects to your question about truthful speak, untruthful speak, or disconnected, shall we say, speak. So these words I slightly shifted again, thanks to Coleman's permission, generosity. So then it became out beyond ideas of right and wrong doing. singing field. I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there. I'll meet you there. And there are many other verses that go with that. But when you start becoming aware of these musical intervals and how our language, our words can join forces with these extraordinary microtonal passages of the soul, so to speak, you realize there is a God. There is a God, and in fact, in Rumi's world, you would be, assassinated or beheaded for saying, I am God.
Yeah.
But now, thanks to quantum science, we know that's truly who we are.
I love it. I feel like in a world right now where I feel like people are so disconnected in many ways from who they are and even what they feel. I feel like it becomes such a jumbled up mismatch of emotions, usually because we haven't given ourselves the opportunity to actually allow them to be and be with them. We kind of push them down, we distract, we do all these different things. So we just have this, it builds up over time where I feel like a lot of people either feel numb or they feel confused or they just feel like they go from zero to like rage or something along those lines. Is like the nuances of it we haven't spent time with. What I really love about this type of work is that when you get immersed in, I really do feel like you're just immersing yourself in a field, like a sound bath, that is then going to create a certain resonance that will allow you a space to just let that move through you. Literally, like you're on the harmonics and you can't help but feel. I mean, I'm a little more raw still from everything with going just over the last while, and I don't have a problem with processing. I can cry, I can go through, and I actually really enjoy the process of going through the emotions that come up. But music like this, it's you can't help. It's like you surrender over to it. I remember doing when we were doing yoga training way back when, and the simplicity of it, I feel like is actually key, because a lot of times we get so caught up thinking like we need to have certain training, we need to be able to do this, it needs to be a specific way. And I remember doing this one training and the instructor had an instrument similar to what you have, and all we sang was the words Hare Krishna. Over and over in a beautiful pattern. Everybody there was singing it, and at a certain point everybody broke down into tears. And it kept resonating there at this, literally this field of love is what it felt like. And then just at a certain point, spontaneously, everybody just started breaking down in tears as you're still singing. And it was absolutely beautiful, but it was just a word. And now I feel like that word itself is a powerful word. I mean, you're literally like a petition to God to be of service, but it was the combination of that and the singing it. And I feel like even as people started, it was a little slow at first, people are all shy, but as we kept doing it, eventually it's getting louder and more authentic and more open. And through that, I think that just then with that travels the reins of the emotion just kind of come out with it. And it's for people that have troubles connecting to their emotions, or to be able to feel them and even let them move organically through without recycling them over and over again or getting into the thinking mind. I feel like these are like beautiful, essential practices. And like that person said to you, it saved me 30 years of counseling. I honestly feel like that these experiential types of exercises, and this is where I think we're also moving. I think we're moving away from intellectualizing things and understanding it from a mental perspective to a very raw feeling sense, and then you know it on a different level within your own being.
I love what you're saying, and also what I love to share with people is the alchemy that goes on between the left, the right, and the third. And so once you've got that, you've got the observing mind coming in. You know, the pineal gland, the observing mind that is able to actually watch without judging and listen without judging to what it's hearing. That seems to be the key because, so for example, we have a practice which is just very simply, how do you feel? How does that sound? All right, so that's the first. And then what quality of silence does it leave behind? And the attention to the silence rather than the sound of how you're feeling immediately enables us all, any of us, to, oh, that's okay. So I'm not going to be having to do this scary thing like making a sound. I'm actually going to focus on what's beyond the sound, you know, and that we find is so precious, you know, because you can hear in the silence who you really are. Who is this? And you can start to really inquire without jumping into the judgment, you know, and that's such a grace, you know. How do you feel? How does that sound? And what quality of silence does it leave behind? So that is always there now in our work, is, you know, even if we're doing very deep work with people who are really investigating, you know, the whole scientific, the spiritual, and the sonic all at once, that silence is the absolute ground of the entire exploration, because it's really from there that the grace comes and new energy arises from there, you know, to deepen one's own witnessing capacities, and, you know, observational capacities. So you're bringing your own scientist and your own artist into the same experience, which makes the whole thing more balanced.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of when we would talk to quantum physicist Dr. Amit Goswami, and he would talk about a practice that he goes, doobie 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 doo. And he would say that kind of jokingly because he's Indian. And he would say you'd hear these things a lot. But it's you're doing, and then you need to be. So there's sort of the outward expression, and then the silence where the insight naturally, organically arises. And then from that, that's the spontaneity and the personal instructions that arise within you to then do again. And then you have to be again. And it's this balance of going back and forth. And a lot of times he said, you know, some cultures are too much do. You know, Western culture is a lot of do and not a lot of be. And he goes, other cultures are sometimes too much be. He said, sometimes Indian culture can be too much be and then nothing gets done. But he said it's this balance of that back and forth. And to me, the stillness is that be. It's like, and if we start from that place and allow the insights that arise within the stillness, or whatever surfaces, whatever connections we make with who we really are, whatever comes in, and then let that infuse the doing, that's how we bring about a new reality. I mean, if we really want to create something different, we look around the world and there's things that we want differently. It has to come from that place. And the more that we get every single person operating from that place and letting those instructions infuse our doingness, pretty quickly,
Right.
I think we could change things into a really beautiful, beautiful way of being on this planet.
Without question, without question. And now with sound, certainly in this country, and is being really referred to as the medicine. It's the new medicine of the future, you know, and that future is actually now, right? You know, it's no longer the future. I think it was Edgar Casey. It says sound is the medicine of the future, and that future is absolutely now. I love the work of John Stuart Reid, who, you know, works with the cymatics. We met 20 years ago when he was just building his technologies and just inviting musicians from different streams to come together, to explore this technology, you know, and to see how we can really accelerate that journey for people the confidence journey by, if you can see your sound, then what happens, so it's becoming very, very popular, very, very
Yeah.
popular.
Cymatics has been great. It's been such a, people like to try to wrap their hand because these things are invisible. So when you make the invisible visible and you can actually see it, and then, there's technologies that will incorporate where you literally are being infused with specific frequencies or sound, and it gives people an idea. And then, you connect that to the work that's been done on water and biowaters and structuring process and all of these pieces, you start to realize, wow, like when I'm being exposed to this stuff, even when you're singing there and you're doing that toning, how I feel it in my body is I feel geometry changing within my biowaters. That's what it feels like to me. And then from that place, I feel like that is all information. So I'm being informed differently than I would be when my biowaters are not structured in a certain way.
That is so beautiful. And so therefore, the whole separateness that we were taught at school, between all these separate disciplines, science and over here and music over there and arts over there, and you're neither an artist or you're a scientist.
Mhm.
You're both. It's all over, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
all these old dimensions are just collapsing all around us, politics included. You know, I think it would be, just really looking at, my sense is that what we're looking at here is something called the People's Health Alliance. And so they themselves also are becoming very interested in, and you might have heard of the World Council of Health, people that are really wanting to investigate, ways to integrate medicine, alternative and appropriate medicine, and allopathic medicine, and how to really keep a very broad view of it all. So this is terribly exciting that sound medicine is really being taken on, in all kinds of directions. It's very, very exciting. I have a friend who founded something called National Poetry Day in England. And he literally did a project where he just literally walked around all the libraries of Britain and prescribed poems for people. So this was like, I don't know quite, was it just at the beginning of all of this, the last 4 years? And people were just like, what's going on? What is this, that, and the other? And it must have been just before, I suppose, because we were all closed down and so on. But incredible response to people with depression, or really very, very challenging states of soul.
Yeah,
And
I love hearing stuff like that because especially in the world of medicine, and this is expanding exponentially all the time. I think people are more and more aware of it. But I mean, you often hear with so many things, if people are only looking at a conventional approach, they kind of generally it's like, well, these are your only options. There's really nothing else because
yes,
it's just not a part of that system. Where sometimes I kind of rack my head, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like there is a world of other, there is a world of other options available that just because maybe the people that are talking to you about that aren't aware of it, but it's like there's so many different pieces and actually way more exciting and in many ways I think often more symbiotic with your body.
oh,
But
absolutely. And that really, really confirms how many people are still taking the authority from the outside, not the
yeah,
inside.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think as we come to closing here, Chloe, one thing I would love to just sort of touch on quickly before we finish up, kind of in a line of where we were just going there a bit, but when people are trying to connect in with their authentic voice,
Hmm.
one thing that I find that comes up now a lot is that a lot of people might even know what they feel like they're wanting to say or have that voice come up, but I just feel like society's come so much where, what can be expressed has been so narrowed down to a very small bandwidth of what's sort of considered politically correct or acceptable. A lot of people are just afraid to say anything for fear of getting it wrong or mixing it up or being shamed or something along those lines. So what happens is it's like you lose a lot of uniqueness and authenticity because everything just starts to get to be watered down in a lot of ways where people are all just saying the same sorts of things,
Mm.
and that the colors, all of the vibrancy is not there because it's just all trimmed back because people are sort of afraid to share who they really are, and whatever that means. Or and a lot of times I think for fear of getting something wrong or being judged. I mean, I remember someone who's a teacher saying like they had this person come in and discuss what they can and can't say, and it was even, you couldn't even say to someone that you liked their t-shirt because that was like called microaggression or something. So a lot of stuff where people then question even what naturally comes up is like, is that wrong? It's almost like we then intellectualize everything and push it back down. What are some ways when people are working with that might just assist them in connecting with that and allowing that expression to come out in a way that feels comfortable or more comfortable for them?
Well, I mean, they say that fear, the fear of fear is the fear. So, the fearing of fear itself is the dilemma. What I started to do, and I came back from India because I'd had this transformative experience in India, and I came back, and there was a period of time for about 6 months when my egoic mind literally had left, was not present. So it's possible to hear people in a whole new way and to hear them and the utter beauty of the whole range, the whole spectrum, and the color that is in there that would be heard and largely unheard. And I started asking people, how do you feel about your voice? What do you feel about your voice, you see? And they'd say, oh, I'm really frightened to express it. So you'd go, oh, okay, so what might that sound like? What might that sound like? And then you have to go through a little bit of kind of, well, I'm not a musician, but then it's like, well, let's just see, what would fear sound like? Now, it's not just like, what does fear sound like? It's what does fear sound like and what quality of sound, silence does it leave behind, you see? So it's not just the fear. So I want you to listen to, so very often people will go for the minor second. That kind of feeling. So that has a musicality of its own. We have this idea that's not music, but it actually becomes music once you start really listening to the silence that follows it. So then somebody else might say, I feel really depressed, and so you go, what does that sound like? And very often you'll hear, now for me, that's really beautiful, So we've got to shift our perception of what we're hearing. So we've got to, number one, really dare ourselves to express how we feel, but then to let that silence that follows really reveal the field within, the spaciousness within which that sound exists. Because once you start listening to it, okay, so okay, it becomes a kind of lament, and then before you know where you are, it's and whereas you once felt that to be this kind of horrible feeling, it's like a horrible emotion, I would say, it shifts itself into the sovereignty of its own feeling. So what you start to realize very often is, there is some kiss we want. There is some kiss we want. And you realize that this depression, there is some kiss we want with our whole lives, and you start realizing that this there's a sovereignty to this suffering. There's a sovereignty. Once I start to learn how to listen to it, the sovereignty that is within that sound starts to reveal itself, and then depression becomes longing for something we cannot name. And fear becomes awe, wonder. If you start realizing there's a homeopathy to this, that you can guarantee anger, fantastic. What does anger sound like? Oh, you want to know? And you just say, okay, do it within, not like a psychodrama, but it's like, let's do this anger and let's listen to what quality of silence that leaves behind. And then it's like, it produces its own creative passion. It's just like hidden creative passion. And we're getting a whole list of all these different emotions. We call it musical homeopathy because
It's
it is.
totally like homeopathy. That's what I was thinking about that as you were doing it. It's giving yourself a specific microdose of the remedy that you're actually requiring to allow it to move through you and just progress naturally. It's really beautiful, and yeah, and it does progress. It moves. You can't stay with that emotion. I remember we talked to Jill Bolte Taylor, and she was saying even an emotion, if you allow yourself to actually stay with the sensation and feel it, usually 90 seconds is how long that neurochemistry actually stays for. But we never really stay with it for longer than that. So we keep recycling and creating the same neurochemistry. I feel like the ability to stay with it through music and through our voice kind of allows us that staying power to actually just be with it without adding to it, without making anything else up with it, not getting into the storyline. And then it naturally transitions and moves into something else. I remember Pema Chodron would say, if you can stay with sensation, after a bit, it organically shifts into a sensation of openness, awareness, and warmth. It transitions. And I feel like a lot of times the music helps with that, even if it starts with grief. That might even gradually transition into joy.
Right. Exactly for that which you cannot name. And Rumi has lots of beautiful poems about that.
Yeah.
The grief you cry out from is the loving cup. It's all of that. It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And we were, God bless all our fascist music teachers and and parents who basically had the same parenting going back, centuries. This kind of really repressed, war-driven reality,
Mhm.
and that is, as you rightly say, is all about to change. We can really feel how that is changing now. If you just keep the mainstream news media to a minimum, like almost not at all, you actually find out, what's really going on.
Yeah.
You know,
And spend the time that you would spend listening to news, spend it in your garden, spend it in a walk in the park, spend it in the forest. Um,
yes,
be inspired in a different way, and you're connecting yourself to a very different frequency that will inform you in a different way. And then you naturally just start to see the world in a different perspective as you move along. You can still be aware of what's going on, but from a different perspective. So Chloe, I love that conversation. That was beautiful. I really, really appreciate the work you're doing in the world too. Where can people learn more of what you're doing? I know when I was looking through, you've got a lot of different music and downloadable songs and meditations on your site. So where can people learn what you're doing and any new things on the go?
well, I'm really looking to create a singing field that is accessible kind of globally, but at the moment locally. But there's this book, people can get the Naked Voice book, which is the book you mentioned at the beginning. There are various audiobooks. There are teachings and courses that I've done with my partners, the Shift Network and Sounds True, and Humanities Team. And so That probably, we have an introductory training too, which you can just get online. It's a 3-part training. And you can just get that on our Naked Voice, thenakedvoice.com website, or chloegoodchild.com website. And so you can, access the practices in more depth there. And we have now, I'm glad to say, increasing numbers of in-person courses that we're running and so on. We also have a facilitated program. If you want to actually apprentice yourself to this work, you're very welcome to check that out as well. And that's all on the website. And lots of music. We have it's like a free meditation room. You just go in there, just switch into the meditation room and just listen to some extended chants for a period of time, that kind of thing. And
Oh, that's awesome. And for people that this works new, like experience it. It really is beautiful. And when you start to incorporate it, you'll find yourself really longing for it. I find when we get the opportunities to do that and then do things in person is just a whole nother level when you're able to incorporate that too. So Chloe, thank you so much. I very much enjoyed that, and we look forward to another conversation. Maybe next time when Taya's here too, we can do it again.
I love that. It's such a joy to meet you. Thanks.